Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, April the 12th, 2024. Today is the 163rd anniversary of the start of the American Civil War. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to look again at the beginning of the Civil War, that precise moment when it started on April the 12th, 1861, And this chart is important, not just because we're interested in what happened in the 19th century, but because it says something about what's going on at the moment right now in America. There are echoes, certainly. Neptune was right at the end of Pisces on that day, 1861. In fact, April the 12th, 1861, Neptune was at 2957 Pisces, and the next day it went into Aries. In other words, Neptune was on the Aries point as the Civil War was starting, and Neptune gets very close to the Aries point this summer. Doesn't quite get there, actually. It goes retrograde, I think at 2957, at the exact point where Neptune was at the start of the Civil War 163 years ago. And there are other things going on in this chart which we really do need to consider, because I do think that this chart does give pointers about what's going on in the United States and what might be going on over the next few years. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, April the 12th, 2024. So this is a chart set for noon. I've gone for New York. There's no reason why I have to have set it at New York, but it's convenient. You can see that today the moon is right in the middle of Gemini. Now that means that the moon is in Gemini for everyone. Doesn't matter where our time zone is. It's a solid moon in Gemini day. That means that many of us feel that we do need to talk. Why do we need to talk? To express ourselves. It can also be a defense mechanism. If we don't know what to do, we don't know how to respond, we don't understand a situation, sometimes the best thing to do is just to talk. We might not know what we're talking about, but just let the words come out. Just talk, and maybe that will actually provide a little bit of a defense mechanism. And the moon, while it's in Gemini, is making a sextile aspect to Venus in Aries. And that's something very useful, and it allows us to relate. So we really need to relate while we've got the chance, while things are smooth, while we can express ourselves in a way that won't be judged, where we don't hit a brick wall. So if we get a chance to tell people how we feel, perhaps we should use it. But we have to realize that once the moon has made its sextile to Venus, it starts making a square to Saturn. There you can see moon in Gemini making a square to Saturn. In fact, the moon is making a square to that Mars-Saturn conjunction that was exact only a few days ago. Now, that does kind of mean that some of the energies of the Mars-Saturn conjunction are going to be brought back into focus. And the moon is a fast mover, so it kind of depends on the time of day. If you look at the position in New York at noon, the moon is pretty much square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So if you're on the east coast of America, then perhaps the most difficult time of day will be around noon. If you're on the west coast, then that would be sort of 9 p.m. So it kind of depends. So if you're a late riser in California, and let's say, I don't know, you get up at 11 a.m., you might have missed all the action by then. In terms of London, this moon squaring a Mars-Saturn midpoint would be 5 hours later, would be at, say, 5 in the afternoon. So late afternoon in London, late afternoon, early evening in Europe. Things could be a bit difficult. So perhaps if you're in Europe, get the important stuff out of the way at the beginning of a day. Up until the mid-afternoon, you should be okay. Now, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, then I don't think you have to worry, because this square between the moon squaring Mars and Saturn is really not going to happen until tomorrow. And really, that is the overall picture today. Though I should mention that the Sun is still very close to the conjunction of Mercury. And this conjunction to Mercury may be cazimi at its exact point when it's absolutely exact. Well, it is cazimi. And so there may be a time when Mercury, remember, is a communication planet. The Sun is the Sun, when we really can express ourselves to the full. But overall, Sun conjunct Mercury represents a time when Mercury is completely combust, when it's just too close to the Sun, where we can't see the wood from the trees. So I think we have to be really careful about that. And we must make sure that we don't jump to conclusions. It's easy to do, because we haven't really understood the information coming in. We've oversimplified it. And maybe we've allowed emotional considerations to get in the way of logical considerations, and we end up making a bit of a mistake. Another aspect going on is a decile aspect between Mercury and Mars. Mercury and Mars are 36 degrees apart. That is a tenth of the circle. And the decile aspect is the struggle to create a particular style. We had this decile aspect quite recently, before Mercury was going retrograde, while it was still going direct, but now Mercury is going retrograde, and the aspect has come back into focus. And it is the style that we're trying to create would be something that might be verbally assertive. We're trying to show that we're in control, and we might feel that we need to be a little angry. Not necessarily that we actually are angry, but we perhaps need to show that we might be angry, just to get things going. Perhaps we feel that a bit of verbal anger is just the thing to demonstrate our power and authority. That may be true, provided the situation is right, but we should not forget that Mercury is really not in a very good position, because it's retrograde and it's combust. It's very close to the Sun. And if we're angry, or we give the impression of being angry, using strong words, there might be even a temptation to use swear words, which would not be very good. But if we were to do that, there is a danger that it might backfire. So we do have to be careful on that score. From a heliocentric perspective, there aren't any exact aspects as far as I know. Let's just have a quick look at the heliocentric position. Remember, this is a position of the solar system from the perspective of the Sun. can see that Mercury is just separating from its opposition of Chiron. There's the Earth. We still have quite a close Earth-Mercury conjunction there. And this Earth-Mercury conjunction is really a reflection of the fact that the Sun is conjunct Mercury from a geocentric point of view, but from a heliocentric point of view, the Earth is conjunct Mercury. And I think this reflects the concept that although Sun conjunct Mercury geocentrically might seem like a difficult aspect because the Mercury is combust, if we look at it from a heliocentric perspective, the Earth is conjunct Mercury. People have things to say. People have lots of things to say. And some of these things might be misguided or incorrect, or we might hear a lot of half-truths, but still, there is an urge to communicate. And so when we hear people talking, we shouldn't necessarily take what they say at face value. Everything they say needs to be treated with an open mind. It's likely that there's a misunderstanding somewhere along the line, but it's not necessarily the case. Now, Mercury is doing something else from a heliocentric perspective. It is on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. Now, there's Uranus. You can see Uranus is at 22 Taurus. Remember, this is all from a heliocentric point of view. And Neptune is at 27 Pisces. And the midpoint of Uranus and Neptune will be at about 24 Aries. So Mercury is on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint from a heliocentric perspective. So Uranus on a heliocentric midpoint can be quite muddled. This is further evidence that the things people say might be misguided or based too much on emotional concerns. Remember that Reinhold Ebertin, in his combination of stellar influences, said that the Uranus-Neptune pair is about the elimination of the waking consciousness. And so Mercury is on the Mercury-Neptune midpoint about that elimination of the waking consciousness. So some of the things people communicate may actually not be based on rational thought, may be based on something collective or on their own unconscious or even the collective unconscious. And I think that's very important when we listen to what people say in a public sense. So if you hear politicians talking today, remember, Mercury is on Uranus-Neptune midpoint. That Uranus-Neptune is the collective thing. Politicians are particularly connected with the collective. I know politicians like to think that they're in control, but in a way, politicians, of all the people in society, are the people who have least control, because in some respects they are tools of the wider collective, and the more senior and the more powerful they are, the more likely it is that they are simple tools of the collective, even though they sound very rational. And so that's how we need to consider the things they say. It sounds convincing, but you have to look at the reasons behind what they're saying, especially now when Mercury is on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint from a heliocentric perspective. That is the heliocentric picture. So I'm now going to return to the geocentric world. There it is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, April the 12th, 2024. Aries, you feel that you've got something important to say, and you expect to be taken seriously. That is absolutely fine. You've every right to be taken seriously. But you don't want to push things too far. You could push things too far. You might say too much, and the way you use words could be overly aggressive. The things you say could actually aggravate people, and it could end up backfiring. So when you say something, particularly if it's something that is important, that you've been building up for, maybe you've been building up for hours, even days, don't take it too far. And if you're angry, then that is a warning sign. If anger is the basis for communication, then there is a very good chance that that communication could backfire. And I think matters aren't helped by the fact that the moon is making square aspects to Mars and Saturn. That means that you have to deal with something that you thought you got over, but you hadn't. You thought you had a clear path, and suddenly there's something in your way, and you weren't expecting it to be in your way. And again, that might make you annoyed. You do have to be flexible. The moon is in Gemini. From an Aries perspective, if the moon is in Gemini, then that's about considering the possibility that there are several routes to the same destination. So you decide you want to move in one direction, you start moving in this direction, then you find there's a blockage on the path. What do? Do you try to remove the blockage through whatever means you can? Do you exhaust yourself trying to remove a blockage? Or do you just relax and say, well, hold on, if there are several routes to the same destination, then you can choose another route? And I think that might be what you have to do. Another aspect going on today is the moon is sextile Venus. Now, regardless of your time zone, Venus is in Aries, which is your sign, and the moon is in Gemini. So Venus and Gemini, the moon and Venus are two signs apart. That is a fortunate relationship, even if the moon and Venus are not in exact aspect. And I think today that's what you really need to focus on, that moon-Venus sextile. Because the moon-Venus sextile is telling you how best to behave today. Other people needn't be a problem. Even if you yourself are feeling angry and blocked and frustrated, there's always a way to deal with people correctly. Even if someone is annoying you, if someone is resisting you, is being rude, whatever the situation, there's a way that you can deal with the matter in a fashion that is calm and diplomatic and can resolve things. Now, that doesn't mean to say you have to compromise. In fact, Aries, today you should not compromise. But just because you don't compromise doesn't mean that you have to get yourself into a battle. You don't. If someone completely disagrees with you, you can still persuade them and show them that your way is the right way. Or even if they don't agree with you, they won't necessarily block your progress, but you have to address them in the right way. Use a bit of sensitivity, and in the end, you'll be able to manage. And so overall, Aries, I would have said what you need to do is find your inner diplomat. Taurus. The moon is making a sextile aspect to Venus. Venus is your ruler. And that should be your guiding principle. You know, as I was saying to Aries just now, moon sextile Venus is a fortunate aspect. It's about being diplomatic. And in some ways, I say the same thing to you. But more so, because from an Aries perspective, you know, Venus is the other person, is someone else. But from a Taurian perspective, Venus is you. Venus represents you because it's ruler of Taurus. And the moon sextile Venus is a time when you're able, to express yourself very well, but also in a way that is quite grounded. You won't forget the important details. And there are important details that do need to be considered. They might have a financial or material nature. You know they have to be discussed. And you're perhaps slightly concerned that when you start discussing these details, you'll get a negative response. But I don't think you should be worried about that. There are ways of discussing sensitive financial matters today. So if you need to do that, then now might be your chance. You'll be able to exercise a certain amount of tact, which might be a little bit unusual for Taurians. I mean, Taurians can be quite tactless. They say things as they are. But yeah, today I think that you can show quite a high level of sensitivity. Still, some people are not going to respond well to your charms. That can't be helped. There is a square aspect between the moon and Saturn that's particularly strong later in the day. And we have to remember that Mars is conjunct Saturn, and there may come a point where you realize you're not going to get any further. And underlying that may be your own concerns about money. You know, regardless of your financial situation, we can't get away from the fact that the moon is in Gemini. And from a Taurian perspective, the sign Gemini does have financial connotations. And the moon is making a square aspect to Saturn. And I think this is particularly an issue if you're in the Americas. If you're in Australia and New Zealand, for example, that may be more of an issue tomorrow. But with this moon square Saturn, there may be a feeling of your own financial limitations. Or perhaps other people's attitude to money might bother you. You might be concerned about people's attitude, particularly if these people's actions and behavior can have an impact on your own finances. So you are going to want to make sure that things are in good order, and it may be necessary to tell people that they're on the verge of making a mistake or that they're being careless with their money. Obviously, you've got to be careful how you go, because, it is a day for being measured. And so if someone is doing something you disapprove of, especially with money, you have to be careful in how you address the matter. Because obviously if you're too aggressive about it, the matter is not going to progress. You'll just hit a brick wall. So it's very important to be subtle. But if you are subtle, and I think that subtlety is really important around now at this time with Venus in Aries. Remember, Venus is in Aries, and Aries is a sign before Taurus. So it's almost a preparatory place for Venus, where Venus doesn't really want to reveal itself. And whatever you're doing, you don't have to reveal the whole truth. You don't have to reveal everything you feel. You just have to reveal as much as is necessary. So overall, Taurus, it's a day when you need to be careful and you need to be clever in terms of how you deal with people. And yeah, certain things don't have to be talked about, and you have to just focus on what really matters. Gemini. Mercury is still conjunct the Sun. And in many respects, Mercury is in a difficult position because it's still retrograde, and it's being conjunct with Sun. It might feel like you can't really fully see what's going on. When you take actions, Gemini, it's important to act on the basis of knowledge. And if you don't know all the facts, then really you can't take action, can you? Or you certainly can't take large-scale actions, and you want to be able to step back if things are getting too much. But not everything is revealed to you at the moment, and you have to consider what might be blocking you. Something's blocking you, and I think it's something low level, like the facts. You think you understand some key facts, some key pieces of information, and it's information that is informing your action. And it seems to be possible that somewhere along the line you've got the wrong information, or you've got the right information, but you're misunderstanding it. Geminis are very good at skim reading things, just getting a general impression. They don't really want to get into the details. So if you've got information, particularly if it's written information, and you're acting on the basis of written information, read it. And that might mean having to read every single word of it, even if it's boring. Having said all that, I do not want to suggest that today is bad. It's not a bad day. I mean, the moon is in your sign. Moon is right in the middle of Gemini. This means that you are comfortable. You're able to communicate very well. You have at least a superficial understanding of the world around you. And this moon in Gemini makes three aspects. It makes a sextile to Venus, and it makes a square to Mars and Saturn. Now that square to Mars may be more about tomorrow. It really does depend on your time zone. But it's at least applying to a square of Mars. And even if you don't feel the square to Saturn because you're in an easterly time zone, you can still feel the fact that the moon is moving towards a square to Saturn. And you might think that moon square Mars and Saturn is a difficult aspect. Well, it could be a difficult aspect. It kind of depends on your approach. If you take a light approach, and you don't want to take things too seriously, and you want to maintain your sense of humour, and you don't really want to push yourself too hard, then this square aspect between the Moon and Mars and Saturn could be difficult. If you don't take things seriously, then they could bite you. On the other hand, if you take a super serious approach, you take the view, well, it's a heavy world. You've looked at the world, serious things going on. You're going to have to work hard. You can't expect anything from other people. If you're slightly pessimistic, not overly pessimistic, but slightly pessimistic, then I think it could be quite a good day. That is the approach that the universe is going to appreciate. So that means, Gemini, if you take a serious approach today, especially if you're working or involved in sort of business or something organizational, then you're going to come over as someone who is very serious, and you will be able to get your way. Now, getting your way may not be easy, but if you take the view that nothing is easy, that's great. Keep moving, keep ploughing on, then in the end, you're going to start to make progress. Yeah, difficult progress. You might not even be appreciated, but that doesn't matter, because you will be making progress. Slow progress, but definite progress. I don't, though, want to be too grim, because the Moon does make a sextile to Venus. That should be more universal, regardless of your time zone. The Moon is making a sextile to Venus. And that sextile to Venus is less serious than the square to Mars. And that sextile to Venus is lighter. It's more perhaps about your social life, about mixing with people, friends, associates, but in situations where nothing is at stake, ideally. So if you want to meet people today and you want to just enjoy yourself, then I think that Moon sextile Venus is going to be helpful. Though, just don't make any decisions. And that applies to everything. Whether it's your social life, your working life, relationships, you don't make decisions today. Because the Sun is conjunct Mercury, and Mercury is retrograde, and you can't see all the facts. So just accept the fact that you can't see all the facts. That's one fact you should accept. I know that facts can be misleading, but one fact that I think, yes, you can definitely accept is that you don't know all the facts, and that's a fact. Cancer. You continue to feel that you're not really ready to integrate with the rest of the world. You do need some separation. You feel that if you were to get heavily engaged with the world and its problems, you might not really get anywhere, and you might be brought down. And I think in many respects your approach is right. You're not in a position to give everything you've got. There's a lot about yourself which you need to keep quiet about, that you even need to be quite secretive about. But you shouldn't be too defensive. You never have to reveal everything. Even if you're surrounded by other people, you don't have to reveal everything. You can reveal what you want to reveal. And just remember that. You're always in control. And in fact, your social skills are quite good. I mean, the Moon is your ruler. Moon is in Gemini, and it is sextile Venus. So with Moon sextile Venus, you can put yourself in a position where people trust you. And why do people trust you? I think people trust you because you're not particularly demanding. or at least you don't appear to be demanding. You're someone who's able to listen and who's able to talk. And after all, the moon is in Gemini. Moon in Gemini can be quite chatty. A lot for moon in Gemini to talk about, and the moon is your ruler, so you can say lots of different things, and it doesn't have to be substantial. In fact, it might be a day for low-profile small talk. I've no idea how people do low-profile small talk because I'm a Gemini, and that's me. I'm not very good at small talk, but I understand a lot of people are good at small talk, and I think today, yes, you are going to be good at it, and it needn't go anywhere. The point is that you're building relationships with people, and these relationships might be of a professional or career nature. You talk to someone about nothing in particular, but in the process you're building a good rapport with someone, and that rapport may be useful at a later stage. Now, later in the day, the moon does make a square to Saturn, and that could be a bit of a problem. From a relationship perspective, the moon represents you, because the moon rules Cancer. Saturn rules Capricorn, your opposite sign. So when you've got moon square Saturn, we might have the image of two people who don't particularly get on with each other. They don't hate each other, as William Lilly said in Christian Astrology, in that book he wrote in the 17th century. A square is perfect enmity, and an opposition is perfect hatred. But we're only talking about a square here, moon square Saturn. And so if you get very close to people, especially in the Americas, especially late in the day, then you might realize that there's a fundamental incompatibility there. That doesn't mean to say it's a permanent incompatibility, but right now there is an incompatibility. And if you and another person have a different approach and have different priorities, you might even have different political opinions, then that could be a problem. So again, small talk. If you need to communicate, don't talk about substantial subjects. And two subjects that you should avoid talking about are religion and politics. I can't imagine why anyone would not want to talk about religion and politics, because religion and politics are very interesting subjects that one should always talk about, but that's just me. As far as you're concerned, religion and politics, I think, should be avoided today, because if you talk about your opinions, you might find you offend someone, but it could work the other way. What if you hear someone else's opinions? If you're American and you hear someone say that they love or hate Donald Trump, for example, that might upset you, or some key political issue that is very, very dear to your heart. Someone you thought supposedly would know better is expressing something that you might find absolutely abhorrent, and you might be tempted to break contact with them or something like that. Really, don't get too worked up about what people say in terms of how they reveal their ideas and philosophies and beliefs, whether they're religious beliefs or political beliefs. Don't take it to heart. It's only words. And it really is only words, because the moon is in Gemini, and that is a key message with moon in Gemini. It's only words. And so, you shouldn't allow words to upset you today. Leo, it's quite a relaxing day in some ways. It's a day when you probably shouldn't take things too seriously. And I think that you can make your small part of the world perhaps a little bit happier, a little less boring. And a lot of it is with the way you communicate. Now, many people are having communication issues today, but there's no reason for you to have communication issues, provided you don't take anything too seriously, you stay clear of controversial subjects, because the Sun is conjunct Mercury. The Sun is your ruler, it is conjunct Mercury. Mercury is a planet of communication. Mercury is having an effect on how the Sun expresses itself. So you are able to express yourself very well. And as I think I said yesterday, the key thing about expressing yourself is to have some respect for other people's need to express themselves. So provided you have that respect, then your own powers of expression are going to be effective, and they are going to be welcome. And just because I'm talking about self-expression, that doesn't mean to say that you have to be talking all the time. You should be talking half the time or a third of the time, just always making sure that everyone else has their say. But you can do it, and I do think that in many quarters you can be a breath of fresh air. You can feel good about yourself, and I think that you can also help other people to feel good about themselves. And your sense of humour should be on good form, and you'll be good at changing the subject. And it's important to change the subject today, because some people are in a fairly negative mood. There are things worrying them. They might be a little bit obsessive. And what they perhaps need is someone like you to change the subject, get them to think about something else. It might seem that you're being a little trivial, that you're not really engaging with the important matters, but I don't think that matters right now. I think it is actually the right thing to do. And always have an alternative, always have a plan B. That's what people want. And to make people feel really comfortable, give people choices. People want choices, because we live in a world where it very often feels as if there aren't any choices. We're locked into a particular pattern. And if you can be the person to say, no, there's always a choice, then things are going to be just so much easier. And really, that is your destiny for the day, to just make the world a better place. And really, it's as simple as that. If you can make people happy, if you can stop them being too intense, if you can stop them being too self-obsessed, yes, if you can change the subject, that might be exactly the right thing to be doing. Virgo, your ruling planet is Mercury. Mercury continues to be retrograde. Mercury continues to be conjunct the Sun. On the surface, that would appear to be difficult. If Mercury is conjunct with Sun, that means that it's difficult for you to really understand what's going on. You miss things. The Sun blocks them out. Or if you can see things, you can't see them properly. You perhaps only see their shadows, and you're working in the dark. It's kind of like Plato's cave. You see shadows, but you don't really know what's going on. It's important not to guess, and I think it's important also to understand your own limitations. But that doesn't mean to say that you're destined to make mistakes. It doesn't mean to say you can't have a good day. I think you can have a good day, especially with the moon being in Gemini. The moon is in a high-profile sector of your chart, and the moon is making a sextile to Venus. So that moon sextile Venus allows you to start to understand the things that you don't understand. And the beginning of it all is the awareness that you don't understand. Because if you're aware that you've got an issue here with understanding, that facts are being hidden, then you're in a great position to be able to understand what's going on. Just got to be patient, and it does require a certain amount of humility. It's about approaching people who know more than you do, and just accepting that they know more than you do. It's not a problem. It doesn't mean to say that they're superior to you. It just so happens that in certain situations, in certain areas, they know more than you. And it really should not be a problem. Well, you then might raise the question, well, okay, how do you know whether you can trust someone? If Mercury is retrograde and conjunct the Sun, how can you possibly tell? Well, you can tell by listening to your feelings, the intensity of your feelings, and not blocking your own feelings. Yes, in terms of the way you're thinking, there might be some muddled thinking, but I don't think your feelings are muddled. Just don't try to use your feelings to don't try and use your thoughts to moderate your feelings. Let your feelings be pure. And if your feelings are pure and undiluted, I think, Virgo, they will take you in the right direction. And talking about your feelings, I looked at the heliocentric position of the planets a bit earlier. And from a heliocentric perspective, Mercury is on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. I think that is important for you because Mercury is your ruler. So we're now looking at your ruler from a heliocentric perspective. And that Uranus-Neptune midpoint suggests that you have access to a lot of weird stuff. You know, I said that Uranus-Neptune, according to the Ebertin, is the elimination of the waking consciousness. It seems that if you can somehow bypass your waking consciousness, you can get impressions about what's happening in the world, impressions that are really powerful, that are actually leading you towards the truth of the matter. Now, the truth of the matter may not make itself immediately apparent, and it's just the beginning, but it's the beginning of a process where you are starting to understand, and perhaps the cosmos is talking to you. And if the cosmos is talking to you, you've got to put yourself in a position where you can actually listen, and maybe it's making sure that your conscious mind doesn't get in the way. I should finish with relationships. There continues to be this conjunction between Mars and Saturn in Pisces, and of course Pisces is your opposite sign. And I think that there are certain people who you still feel are getting in your way, that if these people would just leave you alone or would stop being so judgmental, then things would be a lot easier. And the moon is making a square aspect to Saturn. This is especially an issue if you're in the Americas or late in the day. And it's not just making a square aspect to Saturn, it's making a square aspect to Mars. Again, particularly if you're in the Americas, and so Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and Gemini is an angular sign for you, and Pisces is also an angular sign. So you have to work out how to deal with other people, even if you know them very well. Somehow people are holding on to something, and they might have expectations of you that are unrealistic. And they're expecting you to do something, and you don't want to do it. And this might be a situation where you have to negotiate. You need to do what is necessary, do what you feel you need to do, but at the same time, you don't want to upset anyone. And so it might be a situation where you need to just explain yourself. Explanation, using the right explanation could make things a lot easier for you. You don't have to use a lot of words, but just say something that is simple and direct, and maybe take advantage of the fact that Mercury is decile Mars. That decile with Mars it's about style, remember, but it's quite a high-powered aspect in terms of assertion. And if you're hitting some resistance, just making a special effort to have an assertive style, not a threatening style, but an assertive style. Just make a special effort. You might not feel comfortable with this kind of style, but if you get the moment right, adopting this style could be very effective, and people might think, oh, well, you're serious. We're not going to bother arguing with you. You go ahead, or something like that. So if you run into a bit of resistance, that might be the way to deal with it. A burst of verbal assertion, and that might be all it takes. Libra. The moon is sextile Venus, and from a Libran perspective, that is good news. I mean, Venus is your ruler. You've got moon sextile Venus, and that does give you a certain comfort, and comfort is going to be important. A comfort that things are going in the right direction. In fact, the moon is not just sextile Venus, it is also making a sextile to the North Node, to the whole nodal axis. And through other people, perhaps, not just other people, but people may really help in this situation, but you can find a sense of direction. And with the moon the moon is in Gemini sextile Venus, and I think this is a time to be thinking about what you're supposed to be doing and what you're supposed to be following. I suppose we all need to follow something, and you need to follow something. That doesn't mean to say that you have to give up everything or make any sacrifices. It's just following a set of ideas. And you're not committed to these ideas forever, but in terms of resolving a particular situation. So if you have a situation that seems a little bit difficult and you're wondering how you're going to make sense of it, it may be best to just adopt a set of ideas. They may even be temporary ideas to get you through. And the advantage of adopting an idea is that you don't have to think about it too much. It's almost like you've got a set of ideas. It's like a book. You take it off the shelf. That's your philosophy, your set of ideas for dealing with a problem. Once you've dealt with the problem, then you can put the book back. And so you're not really committed to anything. And that's the way Librans like it, really. When Librans are functioning well, they can have short-term commitments, and they can sort of be on the surface. They don't have to go in too deep. Don't have to ask why this set of ideas might work. It can all be temporary. It might seem a bit trivial, but it doesn't matter. The point is, it's just important to get through the day and make the most of everything that's on offer. And you do have a fundamental optimism, it seems, today. Now, you might think that this optimism is based on nothing real. Why do you feel good about something? Why do you think it's all going to work out? You could analyze it and say, well, you're deluding yourself. Well, I don't actually think you are deluding yourself. You understand that there's no such thing as a complete answer, but there is something to have faith in right now. And faith may be an important way of dealing with what's going on today. I suppose you can have faith without taking risks. Sure, if you try to handle a situation which is dangerous and you just believe it's all going to work out, then of course that would be not a good position to be in. But if you just have that core faith that things are going to be okay, that you're going to have the abilities to make it work, then I think that things should be fine. And in that sense, I just think it's just very important to believe in yourself. Now, at a certain point, you might hit some resistance. Depends on where you are. More likely to be late in the day. And you might realize that perhaps faith on its own isn't enough. You've actually got to show some results. And that might be of concern to you. But I don't think it need be of concern. What we're talking about here is the moon making a square aspect to Saturn. And that's kind of how the day ends up, with this moon making a square aspect to Saturn. And with this moon square Saturn, you're being asked to organize yourself. The organization wasn't there before, and now you realize that if you can't organize it, then it's not going to happen. But you understand what needs to be done. And so because you understand what needs to be done, I think you'll be able to get it together. So always be ready to organize something if the demand is there. And it won't take very long. So it's a somewhat complicated day when you have to sort of mix awareness, cold awareness that what the world is really like, with optimism. And that might seem a bit tough, but somehow you can pull it off. Be relaxed today. Just be relaxed until you hit a moment when being relaxed on its own isn't enough, when you have to show results. And somehow you'll manage. At least that's the impression I get. Scorpio. You are in a situation where you're feelings are certainly strong. I mean, you're a Scorpio, aren't you? Scorpios do have strong feelings. But it's important that you don't take your feelings too seriously. You certainly shouldn't be keeping them to yourselves all day long and be brooding. The last thing we want is a brooding Scorpio. I suppose I do use the word brooding quite a lot when talking about your sign, and probably I use the word brooding too much. But there are a few things that you do need to consider on your own, but you don't want to be excessive about it. And the moon is making a sextile to Venus today, Scorpio. And because the moon is making a sextile to Venus, you actually have quite profound social skills. You know how to deal with people depending on who they are. You're able to adjust your approach depending on who the other person is. And you're able to harness the sensitivity of being a Scorpio to attract someone and to make someone feel relaxed and get someone to trust you. And so I think your social skills are going to be extremely good. But Scorpio, it is important that you don't take yourself too seriously. I think there is definitely pressure to take yourself seriously. I mean, it is a serious world. We've just had an eclipse. Mars, your ruler, is still fairly close to a conjunction of Saturn. But you have to ask yourself, what is the actual risk? You take yourself seriously because you feel that if you don't take yourself seriously, something bad will happen. But is that really true? Is something bad really going to happen? I think you might be exaggerating. And with Mars separating from a conjunction of Saturn, that means that the worst is over. Times are to an extent returning to normal. Still, as the moon approaches a square to Saturn, what we're probably talking about is fear. I think that there is a fear on your part that things could go wrong. You're not even quite sure what could go wrong. You just feel something might go wrong. It would, under those circumstances, it would perhaps be a good idea if you were to verbalize those fears. What precisely are you worried about? And are those fears based on the real world and what's happening out there in the real world? Or are they based on something more psychological that is internal to you? I think that in many cases, those fears are going to be about you and your psychological perspective rather than external reality. Sagittarius. Other people continue to matter, for better or for worse. I mean, that is because the moon is moving through Gemini, and Gemini is your opposite sign. So it's kind of quite difficult, Sagittarius, for you to be completely on your own today and to completely ignore what other people are thinking and doing. And the moon makes two aspects. It makes a sextile to Venus and it makes a square to Saturn. So these two aspects involving the moon really are very different from one another. Moon sextile Venus is about getting on with people very well, having a sense of fun, being an amusing person, sharing your creative endeavors, and in certain cases, moon sextile Venus can have romantic connotations, particularly as Venus is in Aries. In the jargon, from a Sagittarian perspective, Venus has a fifth house feel, and some astrologers associate the fifth house with romance. So yeah, there may even be a romantic connotation to that moon sextile Venus. But the moon is also square Saturn, and that's a completely different feel to it. Moon square Saturn is about boundaries getting crossed, being threatened, being in a situation where you feel you have to defend yourself, things being restricted and frustrated, and just feeling uncomfortable. So you've got these two aspects which are really at odds with one another. One is talking about getting close to people, another is about creating separation, or if there's no separation, then there could be a disagreement, Moon square Saturn, particularly because that moon is in your opposite sign, a sign that relates to other people. So how do we square this contradiction? I would have said it might be a matter of choice. You can choose to go for Moon sextile Venus experiences, or you can choose Moon square Saturn experiences. And I'm not saying that Moon square Saturn experiences and events should necessarily be avoided, because with Moon square Saturn, if there's something you want to end, for example, let's say you're sick of someone and you want to create a break in a relationship, and Moon square Saturn is a great time to do it. If you want to discuss serious matters with someone and you're quite prepared to fall out with them if these matters aren't resolved, then fine, that Moon square Saturn could actually be quite useful. If you feel that stability is important at all costs, and again, if someone is not prepared to provide you with stability, you really want to break off with them, yeah, Moon square Saturn is great. On the other hand, if you want something light, Moon sextile Venus, then go for that. Moon sextile Venus, if everything is on a trivial level, where there's nothing serious discussed, where people can just be themselves and there's no criticism and there's no pressure, then Moon sextile Venus is going to work very well, and perhaps the Moon square Saturn will never make itself felt. There is also a chronological sense with this moon sextile Venus and the Moon square Saturn. Generally, earlier in the day, the Moon sextile Venus is going to be stronger. And then later in the day, the Moon square Saturn is going to make itself felt. So it does depend on the time of day, and it also depends on your time zone. The Americas are going to be more Moon square Saturn. Australia, New Zealand is going to be more Moon sextile Venus. So yes, so it kind of depends on your time zone. But you also have conscious choice, even if you're in, let's say you're in the Americas, let's say you're in California. So you're going to have Moon square Saturn around 9 in the morning. You're going to have, to be precise, you're going to have Moon on squaring the Mars-Saturn midpoint at around 9 in the morning. Now that kind of sounds grim, but what you can do is you can just focus on Moon sextile Venus. It's up to you. You can stay clear of difficult situations and just keep it light. On the other hand, if you don't want to keep it light and you're in Australia and you're not in a mood for just being friendly in a gentle way and you want to fall out with people, that's really what you want to do, yeah, you can still do it. That Moon square Mars and Saturn might not be until tomorrow, but you can make it happen earlier if you want. So what I'm trying to say, Sagittarius, is in terms of how you deal with other people and what kind of outcomes you're looking for, you have a lot of choice there. Capricorn. The Mars conjunct Saturn, which we had on Wednesday, it's still there to an extent, but it is starting to break up, and that might feel good. There's less pressure now, and people who used to be annoying are either starting to move out of your life, or perhaps they're calming down. So maybe someone who was really driving you around a bend a couple of days ago, they've calmed down and I think that you're feeling better about it. And I think it's a time when, Capricorn, you can start creating some stability in your life. Stability has been important to you for a long time. But with the moon making a sextile to Venus, it's quite a comfortable aspect, and it does allow you to stabilize things. And at the same time, it's possibly a good idea to get a sense of context and asking yourself about previous annoyances. What was the context in which you got annoyed recently, perhaps with this Mars conjunct Saturn, and how has that context changed? And I think if you think about it, the context has changed, and what used to be an irritation may now just be something, and it may just be background noise and something that you really don't have to worry about too much. And it might also be a good idea, Capricorn, if you were to start to think about a broader picture. It has been a bit difficult recently to think about the broader picture, but if you start to think about maybe the world as a whole and your place in the world, and things that until very recently you felt you had to do something about, that you had to assert yourself, you may now realize that it didn't matter. So what used to be important may now seem to be quite trivial. Still, there are things you need to work on, particularly towards the end of the day, because what we have towards the end of the day, it does depend on your time zone, but the moon is sextile the North Node. The North Node is your direction. And at the moment, stability it remains important. It's something you should be going for, and not just your own stability, I think, but for other people's stability. If other people have chaotic lives, that's going to bother you, especially if they're members of your family. You don't want to see members of your family in a state of chaos, and it may be up to you to sort them out with this moon aspecting the nodal axis. So with moon sextile the North Node, it may be your responsibility to deal with someone else's organization. You'd think, surely everyone should be able to organize themselves. That's logical, isn't it? It's down to them. It's not for you to organize them. But this may be a situation where you need to step in and just be a typical Capricorn and help organize someone's life. You might feel that you're being patronizing, that you're being interfering, but it's the right thing to do, and I think it will be appreciated. And this is good work for you to be doing. The universe is going to thank you for it. So if you can organize yourself, if you can organize other people, then I think you'll be creating some good luck. It's going to be something that the universe will certainly approve of. And in general, Capricorn, it is important to keep it simple. Keep it simple for yourself and to keep it simple for other people. I think actually if you engage with another person, particularly if this other person is in a state of chaos. And don't forget, a lot of people are in a state of chaos because Mercury is retrograde. Mercury is conjunct the Sun. It's all very chaotic. He said, I don't think it's chaotic for you, but I think it's chaotic for them. But if you actually engage with another person's chaos, then you can help them separate the wheat from the chaff. You may find that another person is just involved with just too much. They're worrying about the wrong things, and they may really appreciate it if you were to just tell them what they need to sort out and what is completely irrelevant. And if you can streamline someone else's life, that would be really good. It's okay to do that. Today it's okay to do that, I think. Aquarius. It's interesting because at the moment the moon is making a trine to the south node, and the moon is, I suppose, making a trine to your sign, because the south node is in Libra, the moon is in Gemini, and of course there's Aquarius. And I think that it may be the case, Aquarius, that there are things from the past that you have decided you don't need. You've moved on. But now you realize that the past is important. You know, I know that it's tempting to think that the past is done. We're talking about perhaps bad habits that you should have grown out of, but the past should not be completely rejected. There were perhaps ideas from the past that might be useful. Perhaps you did some studying in the past that you did it and that was a complete waste of time, or perhaps you read a book in the past, or you gained some knowledge in the past, and all of that is now immediately available to you. And I think that it's important that you try to take advantage of it. And you know what you have to do is you have to perhaps take something from the past which maybe is a little bit complicated, and you have to sort of bring it down to earth. Remembering that, you know, everything you studied, even if it was decades ago, is useful. And so now you can make it all available. And I think that could be very useful. And at the same time, it would be a good idea to communicate your ideas and what you learnt in the past, from the past, with other people. I think other people will be interested. We're not talking about massively deep communication, we're just talking about light conversation, and you could perhaps experiment with knowledge. See if you can carry it off. So if you think you know about something, try talking about it with authority. Don't worry about making a fool of yourself. It's possible that you can actually carry it off. So whatever it is, I don't know, maybe you want to talk about what's going on in the world economically, or you want to talk about some technical detail about, I don't know, how a car works or how a computer works, and you're not absolutely sure that you really know what you're talking about. But you might actually surprise yourself with your knowledge and with your ability to make a good impression. And so in terms of knowledge, don't underestimate yourself. And at the same time, try to be a fun person, and also allow other people to be fun people. Some of the people around you do have a great sense of fun, and they might feel that they can't fully express this sense of fun because, you know, life is serious. We've just had a conjunction between Mars and Saturn, and you need to give people permission to enjoy themselves and to express themselves in full. I think that is something you can do, and I think in that sense, Aquarius, you can be a force for good, and you can make the world a better place. And I think you can make the world a more fun place, because it's not just about your own sense of fun, it's because you're able to allow other people to tune into their sense of fun. And so that's it. It's about taking all these positive things around you, including the positive things from the past, and bringing them all together and turning them into something really creative, because I think you can do it. Pisces, you're still feeling that you enjoy your own space. I think that is important for Pisces. It's because, the moon is in the middle of Gemini, and from a Pisces perspective, when the moon is in Gemini, it's a time where you want to be in your own space. From a Pisces perspective, Gemini is about the domestic environment. And so when you're at home, you feel that you have the most freedom. But are you really going to have much freedom at home? I think the problem is that wherever you are still going to feel a great sense of responsibility. And that is because the moon in Gemini is applying to a conjunction between, is applying to a square with the Mars-Saturn conjunction. And of course the Mars-Saturn conjunction is in your sign. And in fact, the moon aspects the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so, depending on your time zone, the moon's going to be applying to Mars and Saturn, and this will put a growing pressure on you to, I think, make things happen. I think that you're going to feel that something has to happen and you have to be in control. Yeah, I think you're going to want to be in control with this moon square Saturn, and you may not always make yourself popular. So ask yourself why you want to be in control. I think one of the reasons Pisces wants to be in control is because Pisces is a water sign. It's connected with the sea and the tides, and the absolute impossibility of controlling the tides and the sea. And in terms of what's happening around you, you are kind of aware of how chaotic things are, and you do want to be in control of it all. And I think you can succeed, but I suppose you have to realize that control, like charity, begins at home. You have to control things from the ground up, and I suppose that starts with you. And when you're in control of yourself, then you can start controlling your family and your friends, and when you control that, you can sort of move on and control more and more stuff. And in the process, you might be accused of being a control freak, but it's still control. You don't really want to have a situation where you can't predict what's going to happen next. But the moon is in Gemini. And with the moon in Gemini, you've always got to have the flexibility to deal with something that you weren't expecting. You might feel you should be able to expect everything, that you can't, but actually you can't expect everything. And so perhaps what you should be doing today is creating an alternative strategy. You're expecting things to turn out in one way, but actually they might turn out in at least two different ways. And so by spending time on preparing for two or more options or possibilities, then I do think that you'd be making your overall situation a lot more secure. One thing I should say is that the moon is making a sextile to Venus, and with that moon sextile Venus, and it's actually making not just a sextile to the Venus, it's making a sextile to the North Node, and Venus and the North Node, they're both in Aries, and it is about making things simple and not overcomplicating things. And I'm especially thinking about money. And it is a time when action on your part can simplify things very quickly. So if you're tackling a financial situation that appears complicated, your fast action and perhaps your quick questions, your research, your initiatives can shine light on things and make what appeared to be a complicated situation actually relatively simple. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, looking at today from an astrological perspective. And now I want to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like, for those who watch the I Ching segment of this video. And I got a single hexagram, no moving lines. And that single hexagram was hexagram 10, which is treading. And treading is about moving forward without really knowing what we're moving forward into. And that kind of reflects what I was saying perhaps with the Sun conjunct Mercury we have today. Sun-Mercury conjunction. Mercury is combust. We don't really know what we're doing. The facts are not clear. We move forward and we're almost half blind. And in the process, we might get ourselves into a difficult situation, because treading is about treading on the tiger's tail. And we've had this hexagram very recently. And so there's a tiger out there. There's a tiger in the corridor. We're trying to get past the tiger in the corridor. We're not as careful as we should be. And because of our mistakes, we apparently run the risk of being bitten by the tiger. But fortunately, there is a sense of forgiveness here. We're allowed to get away with making mistakes because that tiger doesn't really wish us any harm. And it's quite tolerant of us. So it's a tolerant tiger. And I think perhaps the clues to that tolerance are represented by the nuclear hexagram. So if we knock off the top and bottom lines of this hexagram, we look at the underlying hexagram. The nuclear hexagram is hexagram 37, which is the family. And it may be that if we make mistakes today, those who notice our mistakes will be people who know us well, like our family. The family can be about the clan, associates, people who are just familiar with us and are going to be forgiving of what we do wrong. And so I think this means that we do have to try our best today. We are in a situation where we are going to need to take the initiative, but we're going to be taking the initiative without all the facts at our disposal. It's going to be an initiative in the dark. And because it's an initiative in the dark, there's going to be a danger of missteps. And yes, indeed, we might tread on the tail of a spider. Sorry, did I say tail of a spider? I mean the tail of a tiger. We might tread on the tail of a tiger, and there would be the risk of being bitten there. But I don't think we should allow our fear of making a mistake from stopping us taking action, because I think that we're going to be able to get away with making the occasional mistake. The key thing is the broad initiative that we're trying to carry out. And I think the broad initiative will come with a good heart. And if someone sees that we mess up a bit, they will forgive us and they will understand what we're trying to do. Now, that doesn't mean that we should be stupid. If something is clearly high risk, then we shouldn't do it. But if it's just a situation, something we have to do, but we don't know all the facts, then I'm thinking that maybe we should move ahead and do it. It seems to be the right thing to do. And that's the I Ching. And today is the anniversary of the American Civil War, which started 163 years ago. And I want to start by looking at the astrology of the start of the Civil War. I have looked at this chart before, so I hope you don't think I'm being overly repetitive, but I want to sort of give it a slightly different spin. And here is the chart for the beginning. Where has it gone? The Civil War. And it's so the chart when the Civil War started is here. 4:30 a.m. I mean, I've said it for. I think it was in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, and this Civil War chart is dramatic for a number of reasons. Firstly, there's a Mars-Uranus conjunction. That absolutely fits the concept of the start of a war, doesn't it? Shots were fired. I think the way it worked, I'm not an expert on Civil War history, but you had a fort that was controlled by Union soldiers in a Confederate area, and the Confederates wanted to seize this fort, and I think they eventually succeeded it. And so they succeeded, and the Union soldiers withdrew. I don't think anyone was actually killed in this battle. I think a couple of people might have been killed by accident, but by an exploding gun. But there are actually no casualties here. But it was the start of the Civil War, and we did have a conjunction between Mars and Uranus. And Neptune is really strongly configured here. We've got 27 Pisces rising, and we've got Mercury rising, and we've got Neptune rising. So we had a Mercury-Neptune conjunction on the ascendant. And that might indicate a certain sense of a misunderstanding here. People being confused, not quite sure why they're doing what they're doing, and with Neptune on the Aries point. So Neptune is at 29 degrees 57 Pisces. So the next day, April the 13th, Neptune moved into Aries. Neptune is about something that goes beyond us. It's not about the individual. It's about the collective. And being part of something that we don't fully understand, and the collective unconscious moves us in particular ways, and we might surrender ourselves to a big idea. And this is what has led to this war, which killed so many people. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people were killed in the Civil War. I think it was the first mechanized war, which led to so many casualties. and that's the chart of the war. But the Mars-Uranus conjunction is the thing that really matters, as we will see. Now, because Neptune is about to move into Aries, we can think in terms of the chart for the next day, the precise moment when Neptune entered Aries. So this was the moment, according to my program, that Neptune entered Aries. So it was at 8:12 p.m. And I've set this for Charleston, South Carolina. There's Neptune. There is a Moon-Mars-Uranus conjunction exactly on the midheaven. So this was the next day. So in a way, the Civil War had already started. But I think that moment of Neptune entering Aries really does matter. And Mars-Uranus is configured. It's right there on the midheaven. We can also see Saturn on the ascendant. So that's not great. And Saturn is not just on the ascendant, but you can see that the Moon is square Saturn, Mars is square Saturn, Uranus is square Saturn. So this is what the Civil War started with. Now, why is that Mars-Uranus conjunction so important? It's because it is a signature. It is a signature of the United States. Here is the United States' chart. The United States, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, there was a wide Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. Now, you could say, oh, well, that's a long way off, isn't it? I mean, it's 13 degrees off. But the thing is that Mars-Uranus conjunction is exactly on the descendant. And so it gets, it's not exactly on the descendant, but it's, I would have said, close enough. The United States has a Mars-Uranus feel to it. Mars-Uranus is the angular conjunction, and I think that Mars-Uranus conjunction says so much about America, and violence and warfare is always going to make itself felt. You know, America is always at war, basically. It might be a small war, might not affect the country directly, but it's always there. There's always that violence in the background. It's always happening. And so Mars conjunct Uranus, Mars in Gemini, Uranus in Gemini, was the start of America's first war. It started with a war. It started with its colonial war against the British. And that Mars-Uranus repeats itself. Remember, Uranus has an 84-degree cycle. So every 84 years, Uranus goes back into Gemini. And going back to the Civil War chart, there we have it again. So with the Civil War, we've got the Mars-Uranus conjunction turning up again. So we really need to look at that Uranus cycle. So the next time Uranus was in Gemini was, of course, in 1942. So if you look at the Pearl Harbor chart, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Mars was not in Gemini, Uranus was not in Gemini. So that's Uranus was actually in Taurus, but Uranus was about to go into Gemini. And if you look at the Mars-Uranus, there was a Mars-Uranus conjunction on March the 1st, 1942. So that Mars-Uranus conjunction was still in Taurus. So the beginning of the Second World War, it wasn't yet in Gemini. By the way, March the 1st, 1942, if you look at March 1942, February, March 1942, Wikipedia gives a list of what was going on at the time. From an American perspective, it was completely disastrous. It was also disastrous from a British perspective. It was all about Japanese sunk this, Japanese sunk that, Japanese won this battle, they took this place. It was all about the Japanese just running amok all over the place in Asia. That was a position at the beginning of the war, but by the time of the next Mars-Uranus conjunction, which was on the 9th of September 1943, it's in Gemini. So Mars and Uranus finally make their conjunction in Gemini. And so we can say that, September the 9th, 1943 was right in the middle of the Second World War. So we're starting to get the pattern here. The War of Independence started with Uranus in Gemini. The Civil War started with Uranus in Gemini. The Second World War did not start with Uranus in Gemini. It actually started with Uranus in Taurus. But Uranus did go into Gemini, and by the time the war ended, well, here's a chart of Hiroshima. You'll see that at the time of Hiroshima, there was indeed a Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. So this really does emphasize the importance of this Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. It does matter. Okay, the thing is, we've got Uranus in Gemini. That's the general pattern, the general picture. And then when Mars starts to join Uranus, then we can expect big things to happen. They might happen. And that brings us on to the future. Because right now, Uranus is in Taurus. And going back to the 1942 conjunction. So remember, this 1942 conjunction was at 26 Taurus. Mars-Uranus was conjunct Algol, March 1st, 1942. So Algol is the worst fixed star in the book. It's a Medusa's head. And yes, if you look at what was going on for America and for Britain at approximately the time of this conjunction, it really was not good. It was, from a military perspective, America and Britain were losing left, right, and centre. Now, I think the next Mars-Uranus conjunction in Taurus is going to be in July this year. We have the same Mars-Uranus conjunction that we had on March the 1st, 1942, on July the 15th, 2024. Pretty much on the same degree, Mars-Uranus conjunction on Taurus. Now, I'm not saying that there's going to be some powerful invading force that's going to take over everything, and America is going to be losing left, right, and centre. But I think we have to be aware that Mars-Uranus conjunction is going to be difficult. And this may not be about warfare. It may just be about what's going on in the world, but I think it might be. I think we really have to focus on July the 15th, 2024. I think that Mars-Uranus conjunction is arguably the most difficult astrological event of the year. It could be. And if you have it in your chart. I think you have to be, if Mars and Uranus are, if you've got something at 26 Taurus, I think you do have to be careful. I mean, as individuals, we do have more choice. If we're countries, it's not quite so easy. And look how this chart is set for Westminster, for London. Look how the Mars-Uranus conjunction is affecting the ascendant. Sorry, is affecting it's affecting the midheaven. So we know that things are going to get very difficult in the UK. Now that brings us on to the future. Mars is going to, it's not, Mars is not the point, it's about Uranus. Uranus is going to move into Gemini soon. It's already in late Taurus. And if we look at the Mars-Uranus conjunction, there's a Mars-Uranus conjunction in 2026. And the Mars-Uranus conjunction in 2012, for a start, here's Uranus entering Gemini. I think Uranus enters Gemini at the beginning of 2026. Here's a chart set for Charleston for 2026. That's the point Uranus enters Gemini. April 25th, Uranus 2020. That's when, if you like, the trouble starts. That's when America has to really be careful. After April 25th, 2026, Uranus returning to Gemini. Remember, Uranus was in Gemini during the Revolutionary War, in Gemini during the Civil War, in Gemini during the Second World War, and now it's returning. And it seems reasonable to think that the point of maximum danger for the United States would be that first Mars-Uranus conjunction, the Mars-Uranus conjunction, which is on July the 4th, 2026. Isn't that amazing? So on Independence Day, in 2 years' time, on Independence Day, which is really the solar return of the United States, there is a Mars-Uranus conjunction. And that Mars-Uranus conjunction is trine Pluto. Now, if the pattern holds, you might expect America to be at war in 2 years' time. You might be wondering, why so late? We've already got a situation where the United States is on the verge of being at war with Russia, but things are going to get difficult unless the pattern decides to break. Now, one thing in astrology is that as soon as you start to notice a pattern, the pattern just ends. It's like with that presidential death pattern. I know that's not really connected with astrology, but you remember the presidential death pattern that, was it someone elected in a year ending in 0 would die, like Kennedy was elected in 1960, he died. Roosevelt, he died in office. 1940 it was 1960 it was Kennedy, 1940 was F.D. Roosevelt, 1920 I think was that Warren Harding, 1900 it goes back to Lincoln was elected in 1860, and this pattern, and everyone got really excited about this pattern. Then as soon as everyone really noticed this pattern, the pattern broke. Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980. He survived. George Bush Jr. was elected in 2000. He survived. Joe Biden, 2020. Well, we don't know yet, do we? Maybe Biden will bring a curse back. I don't know. But the point is that when we notice a pattern, the pattern does break. So I'm giving an alternative view. But if we take the view that the pattern is going to maintain, then July the 4th, 2026, at that time, we would expect the United States to be involved in a major conflict. Now, given that situation, what you don't want to have is a president who has Uranus in Gemini. That would be a really bad idea, wouldn't it? I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? So when you're voting, who are you going to vote for? Well, you should probably vote for Robert Kennedy if you don't want a president with Uranus in Gemini. Because Robert Kennedy, where's Kennedy's Uranus? It's not in Gemini. I think he's got his Uranus will be in Cancer, I think he's got his Uranus in Cancer. It's well, I mean, look, there's Joe Biden, by the way. Joe Biden, born the day after Stalingrad, the Operation Uranus to surround Stalingrad. His Uranus is at 2 degrees Gemini. Well, then you could play safe, vote for Donald. But even with Donald, Donald has got his Uranus in Gemini. So you shouldn't vote for either of these candidates if you want to spare the possibility of America getting involved in a major war. Well, if the cycle continues, it doesn't matter who is president, but I think matters will be made even worse if you have Trump or Biden as president, because they're going to resonate to the Uranus and Gemini cycle. But if you had to make a choice between Biden and Trump, then I think you would be super wary of Biden, given this conjunction on July the 4th. So that July the 4th, 2026 conjunction that I was just talking about, there's a July the 24th, 26 conjunction. Let's just compare it with Biden's chart, shall we? Just for fun. So we'll put Joe Biden on the inner wheel. We'll put I think I've got that one right. So there is a July the 4th, 2026 conjunction. And it happens at 3 degrees 52 Gemini. Biden's Uranus is at 246 Gemini. And if Biden's time of birth is right, then it's at 3 degrees 11 Gemini. So July the 4th, 2026 is really going to hit Biden in a major way. A lot of things have been hitting Biden in a major way. He's survived so far. But if Biden gets elected by 2026, it's very likely that America will be at war if this cycle continues. And I think there is certainly cause to worry here. And we better just hope that this cycle breaks. That having looked at the cycle, having noticed this cycle, the cycle will start to lose its power. But from a theoretical perspective, things could get bad. I know things feel bad, but when Uranus goes into Gemini in a year or two in 2026, that's when we do have to start preparing for war. And I suppose one thinks it could be connected with Russia, but it might be China, or it might be something we haven't even thought about. So those are a few thoughts about the Civil War and about why the Civil War is important. And for now, and one thing I, of course, should have mentioned, which I didn't mention, is the fact, or didn't really get into it in detail, is that Neptune is on the verge of going into Aries, like it did during the Civil War. And Neptune gets really close to going into Aries this year. It gets to 2957 Pisces, but it doesn't go all the way. It finally makes it into Aries in about a year's time. So March the 30th, 2025, next year, Neptune is on the Aries point. And it will leave Aries and go back into Aries, and it will drift to and fro. Finally, and it will stay. It will go into Aries and stay in Aries at the beginning of 2026. But that's another similarity between now and the Civil War. And the Civil War now in America may not be about the Union and Confederates and whatever. It may be a cultural civil war. I mean, people have been saying this, haven't they, that America is having a civil war. And the connections between now and the Civil War, with Neptune on the verge of moving into Aries, they do seem to be becoming clear. So next few years for America could be difficult. And 2026, July the 4th, 2026, that's certainly a date for your diary. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. I hope you found that of some interest. I don't want to scare you. It's as always with these things in astrology, so often when you notice the pattern breaks. So I do need to say that, so maybe you don't have to be worried about it at all. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I would be grateful if you were to like it. If you are not subscribed and you enjoyed it, I would of course be extremely grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.